Mr. Mirel, NATO is on its deathbed and EU is on the verge of an abyss. What is your comment on this statement given by the French president?
Well, look, on NATO, I'm not an expert on military affairs, but at least what I can see is that, for an important pillar like Turkey, an important pillar of NATO, Turkey has invaded Syria. Turkey has a very odd behavior with its opponents, with journalists and others. So I find that really awkward for an important member of NATO, and nobody's contesting that. And I think that raises really a question on NATO's credibility and NATO's strength. So that's for NATO. As regards the EU, well, it's not a secret that the EU has never been as divided as it is now on many different subjects, in particular migration, but not only. And I think in the coming month, we're going to see again strong oppositions in the context of the discussions on the what is called the multi-financial framework for 21-27. And the risk is to have again a divide between those who, may wish to only share the funding, the budget, but not the values. And that's worrying. And of course, this, coming back to the enlargement context, I think this gives arguments to those who would say, wait a minute, we need to undertake a certain number of reforms before the EU can welcome new members. I'm not saying they're right, but at least this is very much the perception when you see the differences and oppositions on a great number of issues that the EU is in charge of.
Yes. What are your views on Macron's decision to block start of negotiation process with Macedonia and Albania?
Well, I expressed my views very clearly. I have here with me the newspaper Le Monde, 24th of October, where I wrote clearly that it was a mistake and it is affecting the credibility of France and of the whole of the EU. So I expressed my position very clearly. I think it would have been much better to open accession negotiations, and maybe while taking the decision to ask the European Commission for a paper, for proposals, for possibly reforming the accession process. But clearly, I supported the opening of accession negotiations.
Pendarovsky and Macron are meeting this Tuesday. Is there any chance to soften these rigid viewpoints of official Paris?
Well, I wish I would be there to tell you a bit more, but no, I think it's first of all, in my view, an excellent opportunity to clarify, for President Macron to explain his views and positions, and it can only help, how should I say, to facilitate and to prepare the upcoming discussions in the coming months, no doubt, in view of the Zagreb conference next May.
France will present new methodology, which you have analyzed over past few months. What is to be expected? What is announced by the European diplomatic clusters?
Well, I've not analyzed the methodology that the French will put forward. I don't know what they're going to put forward. What I have personally analyzed and formulated some proposals is because I think that the process of accession negotiations, which has never been changed since, 40, 50 years, need to be modified. In my view, it needs to be more transparent. It needs to be a bit more logical in the sequencing of the opening and closing of chapters. It needs also to not to give the feeling to public opinion, starting with you, journalists, that it's some kind of negotiations behind closed doors, that nobody knows exactly what's happening. So I think that there are many things that could be, adapted, modernized, make it more easy to understand. That's one of the elements. The other one, which I personally pleaded for, is for the EU to open the structural funds, mainly the cohesion fund, actually, and because your countries, Macedonia and the other countries, are really starving for more investments. So we should come up, or the EU should come up with more funding and link this funding to reforms by using a formula that used to be part of neighborhood policy, more for more. The more you reform, the more you obtain from the EU, and that would be very good to increase the funding between now and accession, instead of all of a sudden upon accession to come up with higher funding. Funding is needed now in your countries, in my view. So I don't know what the French will come up with, but I guess they will certainly ask for more transparency, more logic in the sequencing, and etc. Probably, I guess.
Yes, Mr. Mirel is a former Director General of Enlargement of European Commission. Why does European Commission put Macedonia and Albania in the same package?
That you should ask to my former colleagues in the Commission that I left 6 years ago. But anyway, my personal view is the following. If one looks at North Macedonia, what do we see? We see some important reforms which have started since the Prime Minister Zaev is leading the government. And first and foremost, one of the oldest and difficult bilateral issue, namely the name issue with Greece, which has been solved. So that was a bold, genuine, very courageous decision. Great. What about Albania? Albania, Prime Minister Edi Rama has embarked the country into a major reform of judiciary through an unprecedented system of vetting, re-evaluating, basically, all the magistrates, judges and prosecutors. This is unprecedented, never done elsewhere. This is a major reform, a difficult one, and again, just as an important and courageous reform in North Macedonia on a bilateral issue, in Albania, a bold and important, courageous reform on judiciary. So I guess, in both cases, there were good arguments for proposing the opening of negotiations with the two countries.
Wouldn't it be easier for France to accept the start of negotiation process with Macedonia only if it wasn't in the same package with Albania?
Well, if I understand, it's for President Macron to answer maybe that question, but if I understand correctly the position of France, it's not just a question of Macedonia versus Albania, the two together or not. The main question, it seems to me, but it's for the French to explain, and probably Mr. Macron will explain that to President Penderovsky, is to reform, to start the negotiations only if the process of negotiations is reformed. I think this is their position. So if this is the case, then the two should go together for a successful decision, a positive decision, by May 2020, as the Council conclusions say.